Hi, everyone. It's Vanessa Couto here to talk about the moon and self-care. I'm an astro coach and artist. I try to weave art and astrology. I have a background in counseling psychology as well, so I try to put it all together in a sort of a lovely mix. And the topic of the moon and self-care, the inspiration I had for it was really actually quite personal. Years ago, when I had my first astrology reading, oh God, so many moons ago, literally, the astrologist said to me that I wasn't really in touch with, I have a moon in Pisces. And she was like, oh, you're not really in touch with your moon in Pisces. And that really stayed with me. And actually, to this day, it's something I still feel like I work with that a lot. And because of that, I really started looking at the moon and trying to figure out how it weaves into self-care. I know a lot about, we're going to talk about nurturing and nourishment, but especially of late, after some family stuff that has happened, I've really been looking more deeply into self-care. So that was sort of my inspiration in looking into my own moon, in the moon of my clients, and talking to them about, how do they do self-care? What is self-care? And so that was sort of my inspiration for this topic. So the moon and self-care. So in some ways, just to preface too, in many ways, of course, I don't really have the answers. I would love to hear what you guys have to say and think, and you can post in the comments. But it's just like a food for thought, a philosophical conversation around self-care here. So why self-care? So a little bit about, my background on that. And just looking a little bit at what self-care, how it's defined, it's often mentioned as sort of it's care that's provided for you, by you. It sounds like a real sort of short tagline. It's often mentioned as the oxygen mask in the airplane analogy, especially when I was doing my training in counseling psychology. I myself have used that one often, that when you're flying, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then you help the person next to you. But that's often something that we forget to do. We really do forget to put the oxygen mask on ourselves. And another way that's often defined is that self-care, it's about identifying our needs, and then you take care of them. So it sounds very independent. But one thing that came up to me as I was preparing for today's presentation, I was actually in that point when you're waking up and your dreams are sort of leaving you, but you still have a taste of the dreams. The sentence that came to me was that self-care is about tending to the unspoken in our psyche, in our lives. And I'm still sort of unpacking this because in thinking about self-care, especially the moon, because it's so intuitive, what are the unspokens? What are the things that need to be present? What are the things that need to be seen, perhaps, in our own lives? And another thing, too, that I've liked to think about the moon in relationship to the sun is that, especially going back to that first astrology reading I had when she said, oh, I wasn't doing my moon, but she said I was definitely doing my sun, is that in that conversation there, what I started to realize is that for us to really do our sun, that's kind of the experience I'm having. We have to look at the moon, follow her rhythm. The interesting thing is when you have the moon perhaps in a difficult position with your sun, like I have, it creates a very different dialogue, but you go on that heroic journey. So in some ways, the moon is the ground in which the sun walks the heroic journey. That's how I'm sort of approaching my own personal dialogue with my own chart. And again, this idea that our solar consciousness comes from the lunar experience. Again, another one that I feel I often am unpacking in my own personal life and having these discussions with clients as well. How does that lunar experience nurture and nourish and feed the solar consciousness? How can they really work together? And I also think this is a topic that often relates to the conversation at large in the world outside of the astrology realm between the whole masculine, feminine, the whole goddess, patriarchy, all this conversation in some ways, I think it also feeds into this idea between solar consciousness, the lunar experience, the lunar consciousness. So these are things that I sort of am really deep into looking in my own life and helping clients with that as well. And one of the things, because of my counseling background, one of the things clients sometimes say, are you going to ask me about my mother? And this is the kind of joke, but it's a joke and it isn't. Really, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your mother experience. Often I've seen in clients in my own life and in friends, how the relationship between self-care, nurturing, nourishing, is very much tied with the experience of the mother or the main caregiver, or often too with the mother line, the mother side of the family as well, how much that is imbued with it. I often have clients who are younger mothers, and they're curious to find out about how is their child perceiving them. So it's a very rich conversation that just in itself could have its own presentation. But really, let's think about the mother, or the way we perceived our mother. So of course, in the beginning, she was our whole entire world. We were inside her. Everything she felt, we felt. The way she treated herself, we received some of that. So the way we perceive the world really is in light of that experience we had with her. She's our first model of self-nurturing. And on this topic here, I've noticed too, in my own life and in lives of clients who've had a difficult relationship with their mother, how this issue of self-nurturing becomes a bigger underlying issue around whatever they're trying to build. And often in their struggles, if you go a little bit deeper, you get to that point. And also there's the element of the moon, in the sense that she pulls us back to the womb. We want to merge again. We want that safety. As while the sun is teaching us sort of to go, forge ahead. And that was one of the things I really felt in my own personal development of engaging with my birth chart, is that struggle between the sun wanting me to forge ahead and my sort of Pisces moon pulling me back into a different sort of realm. And I also see this, interesting enough as an aside, how much this plays out with people who are trying to birth their business, trying to birth a new career or a new creative project, how much that comes into play as well. And again, how the moon has to do with our body, because we were, tiny little babies. It was all about the body, the needs of the body. What did the body need? The food, to be held, to sleep, everything. So the way the body suffered, the way the body experienced itself, it has a lot to say, through the moon. And in some ways, perhaps how through our education and how we were raised, perhaps that kind of stifled our lack of our own lunar expression. How our needs were able to be expressed. So, and sometimes I think, especially if you have a moon, I think, and sun as a square, you may feel the push and pull between, well, the sun wants to go, the solar consciousness wants to go in one direction, and the lunar needs is saying something else. One thing that was interesting that got me really thinking about this was my own sort of experience when I was born, how as a premature baby and a Pisces moon, my mother actually wasn't really present. She had a lot of health issues, and I was having to be placed in an incubator for a week or so. So to me, that was so linked to this idea of how was that moon being expressed, how, in the suffering of the body, right, as well, in all those needs. And so then the moon also brings in this topic of safety. And this is all related to self-care, because sometimes in this ever-changing world, in the stresses of this modern world that we live in, how do we feel safe, and how do we can sort of take care of ourselves, right? So as the moon expresses our survival needs, our appetites, our hunger, so safety, the idea of being safe, is not only, of course, but it's a very poignant lunar issue for us. And so if you're wondering, am I feeling safe in this situation? What is coming up? Of course, you would look to the chart. You would look at everything in the chart. So right here, we're focusing on the moon, but in truth, you have to bring in the other planets that are aspecting the moon. The interesting thing, too, is that when you start observing and you engage in this dialogue, you may notice that perhaps your compulsive behaviors, whatever they may be, they may link back to a lack of the lunar expression. So my sort of working with myself and clients is like, oh, how could we help that moon have some space, some container in our lives for expression, a bit more conscious? Although the moon is really about the unconscious, how can they have more expression so that it can counter our compulsiveness? And then in that vein as well, if you think about the moon as what feeds us, what nurtures us, you may widen the scope and think and ask yourself, what constitutes lunar food for you? What feeds you? Food itself, but other things take the place of being sort of like lunar food. And that could be the way one engages with work, the way one engages with entertainment, how the things they need to buy, the things they need to have around themselves. Let's say it's like shop therapy, things that are related to the lunar food. So we can start doing our own sort of archaeological detective work on ourselves to see how it links together. And what happens when we fail to honor our lunar needs? And this was something that first reading I had, really in some ways, that was the question that was in it. I was failing to honor my lunar needs. And that really got me on the trajectory of engaging with it, looking at what were some of the unspoken needs that I had that were coming through. And when I did not do them, how did that play out in my life? So in some ways, I feel that in the topic of self-care, which I think is a growing topic around a lot of people who, especially who are working healing or in therapy, that is needed. And so when knowing our moon really does give us, very good clues to how can we do this. So I think when we are not honoring our moon, it's a bit like walking down Moody Street. We are sort of taken by moods, right? So our relationships suffer strongly because if we are able to nourish ourselves, I think we become less resentful when someone else isn't doing the feeding for us. They aren't doing what we want. So I think in some ways, a lot of relationship challenges, and that's why if you're working with a couple, it would be nice to look at the moons, right? To know how each other could help each other, and nourishing them. But in some ways, it's self-care. So how can we nourish ourselves so we don't put all the weight, all the pressure on our partner or in our work relationships? And also, since the moon reflects our more instinctual side, it's not quite articulate. That's the difficulty, I think, for many of us, especially perhaps with the moon in water. How do we articulate what we need? I think in many ways, it goes beyond our rationale, it goes beyond our even memory, conscious memory, it goes back to the womb. And this is where it could get really interesting, where if you do a little bit of digging, you could see what that moon in your birth chart may be representing as some of the unspoken needs of your family line. So because the moon is instinctual, when the needs aren't being met, they manifest as moods. You're moody, you're sulking, or it gets to be psychosomatic, it becomes illness or little discomforts, little illnesses that are really just trying to sort of knock on our door and say, hey, this is what we need, this is what you need. But it gets to that point because we're so unconscious of it. So it's a constant dialogue that we have to be engaged with. So even our physical discomfort or illness, or a little illness, is really saying something. And what is the question? What is the need that is wanting to be seen? So when we are able to, meet the needs of the moon, our inner moon, the sign in which she's in, that the best qualities of that sign are revealed. And so otherwise, we meet the unconscious side of that sign. So for an example, with a Pisces moon, and I'll go through a little bit through all the signs, I could see the imbalance in my life when I was not doing my self-care, how much of that negative aspect of the Pisces would come up. And so it's interesting. I think it would really help when you're working with clients one-on-one to help them, especially around self-care, to teach them things, go over through activities that they could be doing that would help bring the best qualities of that sign. So let's just go over some of the sort of the lunar needs. I'll go over as the elements first, and then within each element, I'll go through the signs. But again, this is just sort of an exhibit, a sort of bullet point, so we can just start thinking, engaging, but really, this is just the map, and you're the one really living in the territory, in the landscape, so you know better than you're the one who has the lived experience. So if you have a fire moon, in one of the fire signs, I think one of the core questions here is, can't you see I'm special? I think with the fire moon, there's a profound need to feel special and acknowledged. You're one of the child of the gods. There's a sort of the fire within. It's very much engaged with the imagination, has this real powerful imagination that needs to be weaved, coupled together with courage, because it needs to express in the world. Whatever the visions are in the inner world need to be expressed in the outer world. There's also a need to vitalize the material reality in the sense that things need to have a bit of pizzazz, a bit of drama, a bit of imagination, right? And I would say that the kryptonite for any fire moon is a life that is meaningless, a life that is banal, that has no drama, no imagination, the sense of creativity. Again, the fire of the gods. That's why I think the fire moons need, in some shape or form, in their self-care and the way they treat themselves, to bring in that specialness, to be expressed. So let's look at Aries for an example. Just to sidetrack a little bit, I did a bit of a sort of a question with clients, what is self-care? And I got a lot of answers of like, oh, I do massage, I get my pedicure, I nap, the list goes on and on. And what I was thinking is, that's great. I feel a lot more people are having this consciousness of like, I need to treat my body well. But I was trying to think of each sign, and I think, let's say with the moon in Aries, there's a need to take action. There's a need to do something, however that is, whatever that is in the situation. And one of the things I've noticed with the moon in Aries is that they need to be able to act without too much restraint. They need to move. They need to get it done. So depending on the situation, the more we constrain them, the more we interfere, the more frazzled they can become. And depending on the way the chart is configured, let's say a moon in Aries is having a difficult time expressing, or the shadow aspect of that, in the sense that it's not getting a lot of self-care, a lot of tending, is that it leads to sort of this emotional flare-up. It could become domineering. It could become very touchy. It makes me think of this idea that the way we treat children is that sometimes the tantrum, the crying, all of that is really an expression of an unspoken need. And that when I was writing this, I was thinking about that when I was writing about Aries. And what I mean here about the beauty way is, what can we do? The things we should have in mind when we're trying to honor, let's say now, a moon in Aries. So honor the one's need for action. depending on the situation you're in, what is occurring, see where can you take action, where can that you get that energy out, or at least bring movement. However you like to move. Is it dancing? Is it yoga? Is it running? Is it going for, speed walking? And also in some ways, find ways in your life where it's okay for you to take the lead. Maybe not in the situation you're in. Maybe you're not the leader in that situation, but how can you take the lead? How can you take an initiative? I think there's a real need, again, to take action. Now, when you move into the Leo moon, there's a need for recognition and attention. And it's interesting because I've seen clients where they're like, oh, no, I don't want to be seen. No, I like to be in the back. And especially when it's a Leo moon in Leo, I think that I try to have this dialogue with them. Where do you find a sense of recognition? Perhaps sometimes it's just a thank you, an acknowledgement. But I feel that need to be seen and recognized for whatever it is that they have done is really needed and needs to be tended. Also, I think with Leo, moon in Leo, there's a need to bring some pizzazz, some color, some sense of drama and imagination. It's a flair for something. Boring is really detrimental. So the lack of expression of a moon in Leo, the shadow side of that it could lead into sort of over dramatizing situations, or kind of getting really competitive and having this one-upmanship with others. It could be the very lack of recognition and attention turns into that. So we have your quintessential archetypal drama queens, right? And then the beauty way, the way to I think to tend to that moon in Leo is pamper. I think pamper is a good word for moon in Leo. Pamper the senses. How can you do that? What is that for you? Or do activities where you feel that you excel, that you're good at. Let's say you're having a very challenging time at work. There's a lot of new changes and all this, and you're feeling a bit lost. So maybe at home or with a hobby, you can do something that you feel that you're good at it. And of course, especially with Leo, with all the signs really, but I think with Leo, that's key. Make time for play. How are you playing? How does play feature in your life? And so perhaps pamper the senses with a nice long hot bath, but give yourself some time to have fun. And then with the moon in Sagittarius, whenever I think of Sagittarius just in general, but especially with the moon, I think the need for space, the need for freedom of movement, exploration, however that is, even if it's just you're a couch philosopher, armchair philosopher. Go walk about, however that is for you. I think there's a real need for movement. My father was a Sagittarius, and one thing that I noticed, he would go walking. He needed to go get moving, right? When he did, he felt better. I think there's a need, because they naturally go into this place anyway, the moon in Sag, is ability to see the big picture. How can you exercise that in your life? What activities would help you have this sort of big picture, or engage in some sort of philosophical dialogue? Could be you with people, could be you with, a book, but a sense that there's a dialogue, an exchange of, philosophical ideas. And when it's being sort of suppressed, the shadow aspect of it, it could be leading to an emotional roller coaster. You're up, you're down, you become pretty reckless, careless. This sort of, or perhaps a very difficult time to commit to anything, and keep on moving on to something, the next. There's a sense that when there's that agitation, something is missing. What is the unspoken that needs to be tended? I think with Sagittarius, the beauty way is to try to really make space and create the container for your dreams. Commit to it. Focus on the things that bring meaning, and not just move around. I think perhaps the agitation of the shadow aspect of the moon in Sagittarius is the very lack of commitment and focus. So that's a dance right there. Maybe the way to go about it is do meditative walking. So then we move into the earth signs, and here nature is the temple. So earth signs in general, have a great affinity with just nature and in the body. I think the body is really important for those with the earthy moon, and that the daily rituals, whatever they are, the core practices you have are very centering, and they are very important. There's something about the routine, the repetitiveness of the daily ritual that allows the moon and earth to feel secure and balanced. It's very sensual, it's tactile. It needs to be, I think, in some ways surrounded by good quality of fabrics. I think of earth moons, they need their towels and their bed sheets need to be of something of a texture that they enjoy. These are not just passing details. It's important. It's part of the self-care. And the kryptonite, I think, for the earth moons is that if they're not feeling like they are useful, or that they're not occupied in something that is useful, gosh, that is, deathly. So in some ways, I've noticed my mother has she has moon in Taurus, always moving, always doing something. And normally she's baking something. So there's something about being useful, being occupied. So when we go into Taurus, there's a sense, of course, that more than anything, the need for comfort, consistency. I think consistency is really big for the sense of security of a moon in Taurus, be that material or emotional. There's a sense too that they need to be able to take practical steps. Just to be kind of thinking about something is not enough. They need to get, okay, what are the practical steps? What can I do? What do I need to do now? They also, I think there's a real need to be constant and stable, but at their own rhythm. Never rush them, right? So there's a sense of there's a natural rhythm that they need to be in touch with. So just to use my mother as an example, for many years, she worked in a very stressful job where she was really out of her rhythm. And she used to have this constant headache that would never go away. She was on medication. But once she left that, she never again had the headache. There was a sense when she was able to be in her own rhythm, she didn't have that pressure. The lack of expression, the shadow aspect of the moon in Taurus when you're not working with it, I think it leads to a sense of lethargy. The sense of I'm in a rut, I'm stuck. And this is the danger with Taurus, I think, be the sun or even in the moon, is that sometimes the routine, the consistency of the routine is good, but if it's taken too far, it becomes a rut, it becomes stuck, and so it gets really difficult to get out. So you need the jaws of life to get them out. And that's I think the rut, the issue of being in a rut is really linked to the idea of how to be in one's own rhythm. I think that's an important element. The beauty way, I think, is that it's important. Beauty is key for, I believe, moon in Taurus. Beauty in their home, in their office, in their little cubicle. And also, if they're going to feed themselves, be it with food or their senses, feed it with good quality things. I think things that are not of good quality, it's detrimental. Virgo, now, again, so back to this idea of the moon and earth needs to be useful. So here we have the need to organize, however that is. It doesn't need to be on pretty boxes, however that organization comes about. But also to be able to have and exercise and express their ability of analysis, to take time to be discerning, to use their superpower of discernment. And this thing about being useful, I believe too that they need some independence while they're doing it. They may work really well in a group, but at least one piece that they can do, take charge of it, do it independently. The shadow aspect of the lack of expression of the moon in Virgo, it can be that nagging, the finding fault in everything, getting really stuck in perfectionism. And of course, the psychosomatic illnesses. And of course, the overanalyzing, things that get really stuck in the mind. The way to sort of, I feel like that you can bring that beauty element into the self-care of a moon in Virgo is to see beauty in the minutiae of life, the little details. There's a craftsmanship with Virgo. I think all of them in one way or other, they're artisans. And so in some ways, the beauty of how things are, even the little details, is important. The daily rituals, of the upkeep of your body and health and your home, is important to engage with that. And importantly, I find this for both Virgo and Geminis as well, Moon in Virgo, Moon in Gemini, to find ways to work with one's hands. Be it gardening, cooking, whatever it is, but use the hands. Because I think it's one way to counter the overanalyzing, the overthinking. And then Capricorn, I feel with Capricorn something very similar to Virgo in the sense is the need to produce, to do, to make something that is tangible, that's practical. Especially with Capricorn, how can you make things that you can measure, that you can see? There's a sense of progress. There's a lot around self-control. And I've noticed with Capricorn moons is that when there's too much change, too much going on, they have to find a little corner of their own lives. And sometimes it's often the body in which they exercise this structure. And it can get really tight, but at least it's one way they find that they're self-controlling the whole situation. So the more chaotic the life is outside, they can get really strict with what they're eating, how they're sleeping. This all around that self-control. So it can be really good, but it can really be sort of a shadow aspect as well. And the shadow side of, I think, the Capricorn moon, when it's not having its enough, tending and care, it becomes pessimistic. And I see this more in the isolation. There's a tiredness, a depletedness of not wanting to engage with others or with life. Things are too hard, they're too heavy. And so the isolation, I think, is a key element to watch out, to look to see if things are, what areas of life do you need to take care of, because the isolation could be a symptom of something deeper. The beauty way for a Capricorn moon, nature, it's the antidote. And again, too, a bit of working with the hands, not so much like in the sense of Virgo and Gemini, but in the sense that with working with the hands, to see something go from nothing to something, to see something grow, to make it, it's measurable. And then we move into the air signs, where ideas are oxygen. So for the moon in the air signs, lunar food, the nurturing is really mental food. And there's, of course, a strong need for verbal contact and stimulation. A love of playing with ideas to make the world come alive, so the brainstorming, the mind mapping, just exchanging or shooting the breeze, this idea that you're just playing with ideas, you're not ready to make them happen, but you like to just bounce them back and forth. And of course, too, on one of the shadow aspects of the air moon, moons in air signs, is that sometimes talking really is a defense against the feeling. And too much talking, you can see something is really, it's interesting because the too much talking is really showing what is the unspoken that needs to be talked about. And the kryptonite for all air moons is that the lack of communication in general is pretty already challenging, but especially when the communication is sort of dishonest, is ambiguous, is very passive aggressive. It really undermines the sense of emotional security for air moon. So let's go into Gemini. So with the moon in Gemini, there's a real need to bounce ideas. Just talk about them. We're not making them happen. It could be crazy, off the reservation, out of the box, but let's just bounce them. the dialogue with others, and it could be with people, it could be through a book, it could anything that stimulates the mind. So with the moon in Gemini, the mind is really present. There's a real need to be flexible with the ideas, the commitments, the presence. Could be challenging for others, but who want things a bit more controlled. But with the moon in Gemini, you need some wiggle room, right? For everything. So even your calendar needs wiggle room. So if you have your calendar too tight, that can make you feel like you weigh down. A lot of the shadow aspect of the moon in Gemini that's not having its full, expression is that it leads to sort of the scattered energies, the focus, any outside influence sort of really messes with your own thoughts and feelings, and it creates all this indecision and fluctuation. So if you thought that the moon in Gemini was already difficult to pin down, when they're stressed, it's even more fluctuating. The beauty way for a moon in Gemini, I think it's really important to honor the need for variety in the change of scenery and the variety of activities. So if, let's say, you walk to work, change the route. If you're driving, sometimes take the back road. It's important to bring in that variety. The rut is the kryptonite, right? With the moon in Libra, while we are, of course, talking about relationships, but here you can widen the scope. It's relationships, not just with people, it's relationship with work, the marriage with work, the marriage with life and social life and self. It's very important to try to balance that out. Actually, more than using the word balance, I like to think of recalibrating. And also, I think the idea of being able to mirror and be mirrored is very key. That's where I would say that the symbol for me for Libra moon should be the mirror, the one that you hold in your hand, where you see yourself and you see the other. It's really important to have that connection. So it's not perhaps about talking to everybody at the party, but having at least one conversation where you feel you're really being mirrored and you are mirroring something to the other. The lack of expression leads to be kind of behaving appropriately, being nice, but not authentic. And so there's that whole niceness leads into that sort of the passive aggressive, trying to keep things under control, but it lacks the authenticity. And so that's a good place to look into, is if you're engaging too much of, oh, I have to do this because it's the appropriate thing to do. Really go deep into that. What is perhaps something that needs to be tended, so you don't just focus on being nice, right? The beauty way, again, I think bringing beauty, much like the moon in Taurus, both of these ruled by Venus, beauty and refinement and grace, especially for Libra, is really needed. Find, ways to have, so let's say you're traveling. So even if you go to a place, go to places where there's some sort of beauty. In your office, in your cubicle, what can you bring to your desk that could be the symbol of beauty for you? I think it's really important. It is not fickle. It's not superfluous at all. With the moon in Aquarius, I think really a bit like moon in Sagittarius, but more of the mind, the need for space and freedom of movement and thinking. My partner has a moon in Aquarius, and I noticed there's a need to be in his office by himself for a bit, just to be with his own thinking. And I think it's really important with the moon in Aquarius, this sort of ability to cultivate independence in themselves and in others. They kind of want to teach you how to fish. They may give you the fish, but they really want to teach you how to fish so you can go do it by yourself. They don't want to get involved in all the emotional drama. So I think it's a quality, but once on the shadow side of that, it can lead to the avoidance of any emotional connection. It can be quite detached and aloof. So that's the difference between being detached and needing space. So perhaps a bit of space to just be and think, actually will lead and help more with the connection. But too much, things that are unbalanced will lead to sort of this aloofness, becoming a little too self-contained, a bit like Moon in Capricorn, the isolation. The beauty way for the Moon in Aquarius, I think, is to honor their need to see patterns that are in nature, in the universe, the sort of the big picture thinking and imagining. To honor the ability to actually be detached, but be able to see the big picture. It's a huge quality. And now the water element, come sail away with me. So one of the things I've noticed with the Moon in water signs is that the real need is to be able to express what they feel, but not be labeled hysterical. This plays out, I see a lot in women, where they want to express their feelings and not just be saying, somebody say to them, oh, it's that time of that month. Oh, it's not that. The feelings really need to be expressed. Of course, there's a real need for emotional closeness, a bit of merging, beyond that mirroring of the Moon in Libra. And I think one of the core lessons around the Moon in water is the need to learn to know that their worth, their truth in their heart is there, and it's true, even if others don't see it. And I really think that's tied to the way that to honor their feelings and their emotions. I think of all, the Moon in water is challenging for our culture and not the times we live in, where we honor so much more the solar consciousness, and we have a real hard time with the emotions, to the point that those who do have water, a Moon in water, may struggle with, oh God, how do I really fully am able to express this, right? And the kryptonite, I think, for any water moon is emotional manipulation. The challenging field, the already the challenge around boundaries is key, and that could also, of course, feed into the emotional manipulation. So it's very, in some ways, it's something we are, I feel, at least now collectively getting to talk more about. Healthy boundaries. A lot of the work from Brené Brown is really good around that, of what she speaks about vulnerability and boundaries and compassion. I think she's almost talking to all the ones who have a Moon in water sign. So let's look at the Moon in Cancer. And I've seen this, it's an interesting thing I've noticed with Sun in Cancer as well, but definitely Moon in Cancer. The mother archetype, the mother, to be mothered, to need the mother. But often I've noticed too, it's interesting, but beside the point, the challenge with their own mother, relationship with their own mother, but a real natural ability to mother and nurture things and ideas and people. So it doesn't just have to be people, it definitely be things. I think the real need to express that they need to feel that they belong, that they're safe wherever they are. I think the idea of belonging is really key for Cancer, be it Sun or Moon. I think a challenged Moon in Cancer, the shadow aspect would be the inclination to cling to the familiar, to the secure, or perhaps to hide and retreat into sort of a mood, a sulk. That's quite the archetypal sort of common image. And the beauty way is to honor one's own nesting need, instinct to nest, to create a container. I think there's a lot around container, be it material, emotional, or mental containers for Moon in Cancer. And whatever are their artistic or imaginative gifts, they need to find avenues of expression for that. With the Moon in Scorpio, there's that intensity already, right? The need to be deeply involved with whatever they're doing, whoever they're with. It has to be deep. It could be short, but it has a sense of intensity. Of course, the ability, they need to be able to express their connection and passion. not just in intimate relationships too, but I think with life in general, to take a quote from Henry Thoreau, to suck out all the marrow of life, whatever it is, would be work, a hobby, a relationship. The shadow aspect of a moon in Scorpio that's not having a lot of self-care is it can lead to a lack of objectivity, of being able to let go. Then it mirrors a little bit the moon in Cancer. I can't let go. I got to cling to this. And of course, the good old emotional manipulation. How can I have power over? It will use power in emotion, right? I think one way to honor that moon in Scorpio is to honor one's need for encouraging that confidence of people coming together and sharing secrets, sharing ideas, sharing that closeness. And of course, whatever is one's passion, give it energy, give it focus. Don't just put it as sort of the later, after I do my laundry list of things, then I'll tend to, do it now. Give it space in your calendar. And then the moon in Pisces, to be honest, in many of the books I've seen on the moon in Pisces, I still haven't really seen a description that I feel that it captures moon in Pisces. And I think for Pisces moon, there's a real need for magic, for art and the spiritual pursuit. Those should be part of their daily core routine. I probably say this because I have that moon in Pisces. And so when I read Harry Potter, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if the world was like that? And so I think for moon in Pisces, there's a little bit of that, of wishing that some part of the world's life would be a bit like a Harry Potter, story. I think another element of the moon in Pisces is a real need to be able to retreat, to go into their inner world. It's not that isolation, it could be, but I think they need to give themselves time and space to be in their imagination, just let it float. The lack of expression and the shadow aspect of the moon in Pisces is the lack of focus, feeling disoriented. Oh, I'm sorry, the landscape artist. People are here. Let me just change to my, I'm almost done. Change to my earbuds here. I thought they were done, so sorry about that. But the Pisces moon is a lot about, if it's challenged, it lacks focus. It becomes disoriented. It can go on binging on things. Whatever is the drug of choice, it will binge on that. And the beauty way, I think one way to honor the Pisces moon is really work around one's own vulnerability. This is where I think the work of Brené Brown is so great, that she brought this awareness. She's not the only one, but she's definitely one who's been more outspoken around that, is that there's creative power in vulnerability. It's not a weakness. My own personal journey around that, it has been definitely a heroic journey of looking at my own vulnerability as a creative source. So that has been a key for me. But I think of all the water signs, the moon in Pisces is possibly the one, because it already has so much around lack of boundaries, that it needs to be able to honor the feelings that are coming up, that are rising, and not just stuff them away through escapism or binging, whatever it may be. So in some ways, just to sort of finalize, is the moon shows how we receive the basic kinds of nourishment we need for our survival. This is a quote from Darby Costello. She has an excellent book on the moon, and she's one of my favorite astrologers. But I think it's really key. I really sort of reflect on this, that how in working with our moon, we are finding, and that's where the self-care comes in, what is it that we need to survive? And not just survive, I think, to really thrive and be able to really engage with our lunar, a sort of solar aspect of our lives. So that's me. So that's my presentation. One of the things I did create as part of my own self-care was I love coloring. I do a lot of, all my art has a lot of coloring. And I created the Lunar Mandalas coloring book where you can color the mandalas as the new moon and full moon of the year come up. And it's been really interesting with people coming back to me saying, oh, I loved your book because now it's part of my self-care that I do now is coloring. So I'm very pleased to share this, my own with to the world. And of course, you can find me on my podcast. I have a podcast on iTunes, Liminal Astro Coaching, or you can find out more on my website, vanessacouto.com. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Any questions from anybody? Or comments?
That was excellent. I love what I heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any suggestions if what's good for the moon sets the rest of your chart on edge?
So if like whatever you were to do for your moon could kind of offset the other,
Yes.
other
I have a Virgo moon, and I have Sun in Libra conjunct Neptune. I'm researching and seeing where I might have adult attention deficit disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to be into rituals. I would love to do that. And I can force myself to do a ritual for a short period of time, and then I get furious.
Mm.
Absolutely furious.
Are you furious at the ritual or at the length or how long it takes?
Having to do the same thing, like having to do the same thing every morning. Like if I think, okay, I'll get up, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, and I'll do this for a full week or 3 days in a row, and it'll just be, I'll have the neatest house and I'll have this, and it's like, I just end up over the sink on the verge of a panic attack.
Mm.
Excuse me, Vanessa, I have Carolyn's chart if you would care to have a look at it.
Oh yeah, share that then.
Okay, just give us one moment.
But while you're doing that, Linda, Carolyn, that's interesting. I'm thinking of, you have Sun, Neptune, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking here about the idea of ritual, and I think to me, that's how I try to work with that, is because I have Sun opposite Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that I can't stick to a routine too long, and that I have to see ritual as something, whatever is the activity that I'm doing is with a certain kind of consciousness, that is the ritual. That, at least my own experience has been, I don't need to make it all more complicated. I don't need all the bells and whistles, or even, let's say, if it's cleaning the house. But that when I do engage with it, with that consciousness, that's the ritual. And that allows me a little bit more room to move, and not feel so stuck with it. Okay, so I see your chart.
It's the focusing on anything that isn't really consuming for any length of time. I've just started to play the piano again, relearning through chords. And I can do that for longer than painting or writing or doing the dishes or anything, but it's a real focus thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that makes me think about that moon in Virgo there is the idea of bite size. It's the minutiae, it's small. So take it in bite size.
That helps. Actually, I was listening to a podcast and they suggest you do 5 minutes. Like you set your timer and you just do whatever it is for 5 minutes. And then you continue if you want to, or you go and do something else. So after a couple of days of doing that, when the timer goes off to do my 5 minutes, I don't move.
Mm-hmm.
It's just stuck.
You can't do the activity anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to trick myself in different ways to get going.
Mm.
Anyway, I just
I think
working on, that's all.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, I'm just thinking about the Sun Neptune here. To me, there's a sense of kind of needing to have that flow, right? And I think the music, that's interesting. I think I would play as well with the phase of the moon you're in, that balsamic moon.
Yeah.
I would work with that. I think it's a real, I think it's as if like you need the structure. That moon in Virgo wants a bit of structure, but not too strict, because that Sun Neptune is like, no, I can't be too strict. So bite-sized things, I think that would be the way, but without a sort of full conversation.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing your example.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So any final questions or comments, and then we'll wind down.
I just wanted to say something. Well, thank you for everybody who showed up too. But I think it's a good, I think it's a conversation we can even take it out in the world, because even the little bit that I was asking around people who didn't even know their moon signs, what do they do for self-care? It's just really interesting how I feel it's a topic that people are starved for. And so I think it's a good conversation to engage with those around us as well, and find ways, how do we do this? Because especially, with what's happening in the world now, there's so much pressure around us that self-care, I think it's coming out of the closet as something that is like, oh yeah, it's pedicure and massage, and it's much more like we do need that oxygen mask on ourselves. So I just hope to take this topic a little wider, and I think working with our moon, engaging that sort of detective work with ourselves is helpful. So we can take the conversation, continue it on the Facebook group, and take it there too, and see what others say.
Okay, thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thank you, Linda.
I'll just add quickly that yes, this issue certainly is out of the closet, because about a month ago, transiting Pluto opposed its own North Node in Cancer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a huge evolutionary issue, like a huge focus on this area. And I'm certainly feeling it myself, because I have my moon at 20 degrees Cancer, which is exactly opposite Pluto at the moment. So it really has come out of the closet, because it's reached the opposition to Pluto. The North Node has reached the opposition to transiting Pluto. So it's out there into the social sphere where we can all see it very clearly, and of course have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, we one other thing we need, because just your example of the moon, we need that community that we belong. We came out of the closet. Let's talk about it. But how can now we help each other with that?
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, thanks again, and thanks from all of us, and hope to see you at another Zoom meeting in the future. So I'll just unmute everyone, and they can just tell you how they feel, and we'll see you later. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Renee.
Thank you. It was very good.
Thank you.
Vanessa.
You're welcome.
Artwork is beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye for now, everyone. See you soon. Bye.
See ya.